with some films in the past, is with its great performances and great cinematography. Our guest is John Bailey. John Bailey has worked on many important films that we all know and love. Ordinary People, which is a film I don't necessarily love, but I can respect. Groundhog Day, Silverado, and many films up until this year's How to Be a Latin Lover. Yes. So up until the current time. John has been on the Board of Governors of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences for a number of years. That's the organization that gives out the Oscars. And then in August, he was elected as president of the organization, which is really president of the Board of Governors, representing the industry. And we're just so happy that he was able to spend the day with us today at the Packard campus to talk to staff, to see the preservation and restoration activities that we have with our recorded sound, television, radio, and motion picture collections. John is also very much a scholar of film, and so the work, what he's going to be talking about tonight is based on research in some of the collections that are held by the Academy. But rather than my tell you about the Academy, I'll let John do that. So please welcome John Bailey.
Thank you very much, and good evening again. Thank you for coming out. Dave and I spent all day yesterday in the Library of Congress for the annual meeting of the National Film Preservation Board, where we are thrashing out the 25 films that will be listed shortly before Christmas for this year's National Film Registry. And one of the films that I've been an advocate for a few years is the film you're going to see tonight. And might get lucky this year. We'll know in a month and a half or so. I'm going to read you the notes that I've written for an earlier screening we did of this film. Before I was president, I was in charge of Preservation and History Committee at the Academy, and part of my mandate was to work with the Herrick Library and the Academy Film Archives and bring the resources, the film prints of the archive and the supporting materials from the library and create essentially a presentation like the sort of load-in slides you saw. And I don't know if you got here early enough, you probably saw some color slides that were representative of the town of Claude, Texas, as it looks today, or as it looked last year. My wife and I, film editor Carol Littleton, were there last year because I've been long obsessed with this movie. And almost, it's like a fan of it, as a matter of fact, rather than just as a co-filmmaker. So I made a presentation of the film earlier this year with some notes that reflected some of my research. So with your indulgence, if you don't mind actually just reading these notes tonight, I think it might give you a little sort of insight into at least, how I feel about the movie. So while you were getting seated this evening, during the slideshow, you may have seen a few photographs of the town of Claude, Texas. Carol and I spent a morning there last year during a driving trip through small towns of the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles. I was born in Missouri, and Carol was born and raised in northeastern Oklahoma. And so we, on this trip, were actually driving through the heartland of America, and it was sort of highlighted by the fact that we went to Claude and saw this little town. We had stopped in this out-of-way farming community southeast of Amarillo because it was there on May 21st, 1962, that a crew from Paramount Studios began 30 days of filming for the Martin Ritt-directed Paul Newman starring movie HUD, a film I had deeply admired since seeing it in my student days at USC Cinema. In the script, the town's name is Thalia. In filming, it became Vernal. Here's how the screenwriters, Irving Ravitch and Harriet Frank Jr., who were husband and wife, described the town. The gold rays of the sun flushed on the chrome of an old truck as it slows down to enter town. Thalia, Texas is one of those unseen little places along the highway where some roads end and others begin. It is a sun-parched oasis, a town of underpainted houses and grassless yards full of pea pods, goat heads, and weeds. Adapted from Horseman Pat Spy, the first novel by then young writer Larry McMurtry, the title, like many novels that reference the Bible or poetry, is the last line from the poem Under Ben Bulben by W.B. Yeats. Cast a cold eye on life, on death, horsemen pass by. Yeats intended this to be his own epitaph. His cold eye comes to ground in the playing out of the film. The movie's title spotlights Paul Newman's pivotal role as the Bannon family's seductive blue-eyed bad boy. But the film is a complex, multi-generational portrait of a family and a way of life at the cusp of unwelcome changes. Changes that drive deep wedges into the already fractured relationship of HUD and his enfeebled father Homer, portrayed by the great Melvin Douglas, an old man who retains a soul tough as rawhide. Brandon DeWilde, already a veteran of movies and the stage at age 22, is Lon, son of HUD's deceased brother. DeWilde, nominated for an Academy Award a decade earlier for his portrayal of Joey Starrett in Shane, died in an auto accident in Denver a few months after he turned 30. The principal cast is rounded out by Patricia Neal as the family's maid and cook, Alma. Both Neal and Douglas received Academy Awards for their performances, as did cinematographer James Wong Howe. Newman and Ritt received Oscar nominations, as did husband and wife Ravitch and Frank, who scripted 8 movies for Martin Ritt. Reading McMurtry's novel illuminates some of the speed bumps in developing a novel into a screenplay, then into a finished film. I don't want to reveal any plot spoilers for those of you who haven't seen HUD. How many have seen it for the first time? Oh, that's so great. That's at least half of you. That's absolutely terrific. Anyway, I will just say that in the novel, HUD is a minor character. He doesn't even make an appearance until 1/4 of the way through the book. And the movie's opening title sequence, showing Lon hitching a ride into town in first light to retrieve his Uncle HUD from a night's carousing, doesn't exist in the novel at all. But the screenwriter's leisurely off-screen introduction, where he's talked about for 5 minutes or so before you actually see him, it quickly outlines, before you see him, his alpha male character. At this point, Newman was already a major movie star, having played several dark outsider roles. Here, he is a man roiling in the pit of hell itself. Ravitch and Frank discuss HUD in a Michigan Quarterly interview from 2003 with William Baer. Frank: in our society, there's always been a fascination with the charming villain, and we wanted to say that if something's corrupt, it's still corrupt, no matter how charming it might seem, even if it's Paul Newman with his beautiful blue eyes. But things didn't work out the way we'd planned. Baer: it actually backfired. Ravitch: yes, it did, and it was a terrible shock to all of us. At the first screening, the preview cards asked the audience, which character did you most admire? And many of them answered, HUD. We were completely astonished. Obviously, audiences loved HUD, and it sent us into a tailspin. The whole point of all our work on that picture was apparently undone because Paul was so charismatic. There's something in the American psyche that's sadly attracted to the dangerous, the flamboyant. Later in the interview, Frank explores the question of how the novel's black maid and cook, Almia, became Patricia Neal's white Alma. We would have loved to keep her black for the movie. She has moral strength, she's benevolent, she's tough-minded, and she's secure in herself. So we would have loved to say to the world, look, here's a hell of a woman and she's black. But in those days, you simply couldn't do it. And not because the talent wasn't there. There were at least a half dozen powerhouse black actresses who could have played that role. James Wong Howe's stark black and white cinematography is evidence that studio glamour lighting was on the wane. And just parenthetically, James Wong Howe came from that studio era of the really glossy, beautiful, luscious lighting look that made the stars into demigods. That's not his lighting in this movie. Howe complains that on one crucial day of photography, the cattle, seen with the cattle being herded into pits, presented a photographic challenge. He says, a lot of fluffy clouds decorated the sky. Every time I looked up and saw those clouds, I hated them. What I really wanted was a bleak, early morning sky. We had to go ahead and shoot anyway. Every time I look at that sequence now, it frustrates me because it's too beautiful to be in keeping with the scene. The final scene, with a long volley shot of HUD outside the house, was written to shoot in Lon's small bedroom. And you'll know this scene when it starts because it comes right, I don't want to give away a plot point, it comes right after a funeral. And we see HUD driving up to the now kind of almost deserted ranch in his Cadillac convertible. And that's how the sequence begins. That scene was originally written to shoot in Lon's small bedroom upstairs. It's fascinating to ask at what point Britt and Howe decided to open the scene up as an exterior, ending with that stunning final image of HUD at the door. Believe me, it's one of those iconic moments in the history of American movies. 5.5 decades later, after HUD was released, it's today more than a nostalgic meditation on the passing of a mythic way of life. It's a mirror into today's fractured America. Naked, narcissistic self-interest has always been a dark undercurrent in the limpid stream of American optimism and justice. But it's not much of a stretch to see HUD as avatar of the cynicism and another side of American populism, the side that espouses fake concern for one's fellow man while lining one's pockets. HUD, a Lothario at the wheel of his convertible, raising a shroud of dust in his trail, is a flim-flam man. His type erupts over and over onto America's psyche like a painful pustule. But like some flim-flam men of today, he sure as hell is watchful. Enjoy the film.